All right, looks like we are live. Share to the shoot page. All right, I'm with you. So good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us, wherever you might be joining us or tuning in from, whether it's in Melbourne, Sydney, or across the world, or possibly even from South Africa. I think there are some who've joined us from the homeland, as they say. My name is Rabbi Daniel Rabin, Rabbi at South Caulfield Hebrew Congregation, and it gives us great pleasure to welcome Howard Sackstein. And Howard, a big thank you to you for agreeing to spend some time with us, to give us of your precious time. I know things are busy. I know you're a sought-after man who people want to hear what you have to say. And certainly for us here in Melbourne, at least, we've been, certainly for those of us who are originally from South Africa and have family in South Africa, we obviously still have a lot of interest as to what happens there, and we want the best for that country and for our family and for the Jewish community and the general community in South Africa. And so, of course, over the last number of months with COVID and in the recent looting and all sorts of things that have been happening in South Africa. So I thought it would be great. And I also want to thank Chazan Greg, who he said to me, just send Howard a message and see if you'd agree to give us some of his time. And so it was a good choice. So yeah, lots to talk about. And once again, a big thank you to you for your time. Just a little bit of update. We in Melbourne, we're supposed to be ending our 5th lockdown tomorrow evening, but it looks like, according to our premier, that we're going to be extended for further lockdown. So this COVID battle still wages on in different forms and shapes across the world. And yeah, we're not sure how long our lockdown will continue, probably another week or two. But what's the current... Well, firstly, tell us a little bit about yourself, Howard. And I just want to wish you long life. I know a good friend of yours passed away yesterday, so thank you for still making time for us. I know it's not easy, and please God, only simchas going forward.
Thanks, Rolf, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. I'm speaking to you from a very cold Johannesburg today. It was 2 degrees when I woke up this morning, which is a little unusual. I presume a big chunk of your audience have South African roots. Is there any way to actually show by hand or something if you connected to the old homeland here, or if you thoroughbred Australians? Okay, I see there's a good chunk of...
Type in the chat where you currently from, and if you're typing from Melbourne, write Melbourne/Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, and where you might originate from. It'd be interesting to see.
So in fact, it was a good morning for me because I woke up early in the 2-degree cold in order to go get my 2nd Pfizer vaccine. So thank you. So that's a great relief. And almost talking to you, I think we're talking about different universes. You know, you're talking about your 5th lockdown since COVID began. I have been in my home for over 16 months. I have not been into my office in 16 months. Yeah. In the last 3 months since our 3rd wave began, I actually, besides for going to see my parents who live around the corner from me where I walk, I have not left my home. I have not been into a shop. I have not been into a restaurant. I have not gone to get a cup of coffee in now 3 months. So that's, I think, a very different universe and a very different reality that we live in South Africa. So we've peaked in our 3rd wave, at least in the Gauteng region, the Johannesburg region, we peaked, and numbers are coming down very fast. But we're still having approximately 400 to 500 people die per day of COVID in South Africa. And that's the official statistics. We're sitting at about, I think it's now about 65,000 people who've died from COVID as the official figures. But if you look at the excess death rates, the number of people who've died since the start of COVID in comparison to the number we would have expected if there was no COVID, we're now about 180,000 people who've died in excess of the expected numbers since COVID began.
Unbelievable.
And that is a huge, huge impact on the country. In fact, Discovery Health, who I'm sure many of you know, the insurance company started by Adrian Gore, who many of us are members of as health insured, the Discovery Health company predicts that in places like the Eastern Cape, Port Elizabeth and East London, that 92% of the population have been infected at least once by COVID. In the Western Cape, probably we're sitting at about 42%. And if you look at countrywide, when they take, for example, blood donations from the blood services, when they look at the Eastern Cape, 62% of people have antibodies to the COVID virus when they take people's blood. So you can see how prevalent it's been in South Africa and why the impact on South Africa has been so severe and so strong. And so I think we live in a very different universe and a very different world to you. And I think that was certainly made a lot more clear over the last week when violence and looting really started spreading throughout South Africa. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. It didn't spread throughout South Africa. It was very contained. It was contained to the KwaZulu-Natal region and to small little sections of Gauteng close to Johannesburg and Soweto and Alexander. It did not go anywhere else. And that is a very positive sign, but I don't think people have a sense of what it was like. So Rob, what I actually did yesterday is I put together a little 5-minute montage of thoughts and some videos just to give people a sense of what it was like and what we've been through, and I think what the issues are. And if you don't mind, I'd love to play it to people. It's about 5 minutes, 30 seconds, and then we can come back and discuss it.
Absolutely. I actually watched it, so I think it's definitely worthwhile. And when we come back from watching that, because I think it was really eye-opening to hear your comments. But when we come back, I just wanted to remind everybody, if you do have any questions, I will monitor the chat and I'll put them to Howard as we go through. But it is interesting, Howard, you asked the question about where people are from, and people have been wonderfully responsive. When you have a chance to just look through the chat to see.
I've been watching as it comes in. It's absolutely amazing.
Good. Okay. So, yeah, you know how to set that up. I've made you a co-host. You should be able to play it.
Thanks so much. Let me begin it. What if this is us? I'm cursed with optimism. But as the smouldering cinders of last week burned themselves to charcoal, and our president, flanked by his podgy, unkempt generals, wailed war talk of an insurrection, and social media was overrun with stirring renditions of the national anthem and images of people sweeping the broken shards of debris from a week of shame, I felt shortchanged. I cannot allow my optimism to blind me like the cataracts to reality. In a slight elevation of his usual monotone, the president informed us that an unnamed Zuma and a dirty dozen of saboteurs wrought havoc on our nation. In an attack on our democracy, they targeted road arteries, ports, oil refineries and strategic key points. But their attempted resurrection had come to naught. The woke coterie of TV commentators berated us with stories of how what we had witnessed is the poor, the destitute and the unvaccinated taking food to which they were entitled given the long COVID shutdowns, gross income inequality and insufficient government support. My fellow squad of optimists tell us how the country has come together, how people of all races have manned the barricades, protected the malls, how taxi associations have sought out the fugitives, and how, with brooms in hand, by sweeping the distraction out of supermarket aisles, we will rebuild South Africa. Channeling a national therapist, our president assured us that this past week was not us. This is not who we are as a people, he said. But what happens if he's wrong? Isn't it time to take a really good look at ourselves in the mirror and realize this is exactly us? This is exactly who we have become as a nation. What concerns me is not that a kleptocratic former president and his criminal cohort attempted to overthrow a democratically elected government. What doesn't worry me is that sadly Pick n Pay and Shoprite checkers were robbed of bread and milk and eggs. What does concern me most is the image of luxury and semi-luxury vehicles waiting peacefully in line for their chance to loot the macro distribution center in KwaZulu-Natal. These cars and their parting jubilant occupants were not the poor, the hungry, the destitute. These were middle class and upper middle class fat cats willing to steal because order and law and society had simply broken down. After 1994, the first democratic elections, while executive director of the Independent Electoral Commission, I employed the services of a private detective to track down the assets of the commission, which had been stolen, looted and plundered during our first democratic vote. The detective taught me a very valuable lesson. 20% of the population will always steal, he explained. 20% of the population will never steal. But the remaining 60% of people will steal and rob and loot if they are presented with an opportunity where they're likely to get away with it, when law and order has broken down, and where criminality has become an acceptable norm of society. When you live in a society with no consequence, when theft is all around you, when those in power are never brought to justice, then the fertile ground is ploughed for anarchy. Permission is granted to everyone to say, if he can, why can't I? If the police stand back and watch the looting, swearing helplessly at the criminals, but allowing the chaos to engulf the nation, then you are guaranteed crime with no consequence. In Rwanda, ordinary citizens turned on their neighbors and became murderers for a month. They were not murderers before, and they were not murderers after. Similarly, in Nazi Germany, in places like Lithuania, where most of us in the Jewish community come from, Jews were killed by their neighbors who did not kill before and did not kill again. But the climate was created where there was no consequence for your crime, where criminality was the norm, where everyone was given permission to be part of the mob rather than the one who stands up against the tide. In these circumstances, ordinary, law-abiding, tummy-filled South Africans took to the street to steal 67,000 rand couches that don't fit into their homes, to loot 75-inch TVs that can't fit into their cars, and to line up orderly and peacefully, waiting to loot and plunder their local mall and store. So, Mr. President, this was not an aberration. This was us. This was the real South Africa that we created. A country with no consequence. A country that the apartheid apologists warned us about. And so it's time to look in the mirror and realize that the real South Africa just punched us directly in the face.
Wow. A lot to unpack there. A lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack. So I think it starts off that obviously this started off political.
Yeah.
Jacob Zuma was jailed for his failure to appear before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture in South Africa. He was a former president. And certainly a group of people around him decided they could start an insurrection, or they could create enough chaos that would try to force the hand of our government to release him from jail. And that's definitely the way it started. On the first day, you probably saw people carrying signs that said, "Free Jacob Zuma." But you didn't see that after the first few hours. People didn't carry "Free Jacob Zuma." They carried free fridges and washing machines and things that they had looted out of stores. And in essence, what really happened, what started as a little political insurrection, the sort of thing that our president wants us to focus on because he's going to use this as an excuse to go and crush the former president's supporters who have created chaos in the country. And, you know, our Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, estimates that under Jacob Zuma, 500 billion rand was looted from the South African fiscus. That's a huge, ridiculous amount. In fact, a calculation was done last week that in total, when you look at the amount of money that has been lost to corruption in the 26 years of democracy in South Africa, we're sitting at about 1.5 trillion rand. That's about 50,000 rand per adult South African. And that's not money. That's pensions that weren't paid. That's houses that weren't built. That's social grants that were never paid because we stole the money from the country. Now, there will be people watching this who will say to us, of course, what did you expect the black government? And I want you to understand that this is nothing new. I ran elections for 6 years. I know what happened in our previous government. I know how the National Party and the previous white government stole the country blind. I know, for example, that we took our nuclear weapons, our enriched uranium, and sold it back to the Americans for $500 million. And that money was shared between our previous cabinet, who all deposited it into bank accounts in Switzerland. So this is not new. South Africa has had decades and decades of corruption, and we've merely carried on this level of corruption within the country. So it's not an issue of black and white. It's not an issue of ANC. We have a long history, a long tradition in South Africa of complete gross corruption and stealing from the people of the country. So it started off political. And yes, if you want to buy into the narrative that this was a political insurrection, the way the president's trying to sell it, you can understand that narrative completely. As you can understand, in a place where 75% of youth in South Africa have no jobs, where the official unemployment rate sits at about 32%, but in practice, the real unemployment rate sits at about 50%, then you can buy into a narrative that says, well, of course, these people had no other option. Suddenly they had access to food and washing machines and cars in some instances, and they went out in order to go get those things which they couldn't otherwise get their hold on. And that's also a legitimate explanation of what happened over last week. But it doesn't explain the fact that ordinary people in cars, not the poor, not the destitute, but the middle class, saw this as an opportunity to go take advantage of what was happening. And I think it's really interesting because I don't know if any of the people on this Zoom have actually read any of the works of behavioral economists like Dan Ariely, who specializes in honesty. And when you look at Dan Ariely and all the research he's done, and Dan Ariely is a fascinating figure, an Israeli, in fact, blown up, an ordnance explodes while he's in the Israeli army, burns half of his body, he lands up in hospital, and he thinks about one thing continuously because he's in hospital with third-degree burns for over a year. And doctors every day and the nurses come and they have to change his bandages every day. And he becomes obsessed with one thing. Should they take off his bandages really fast with excruciating pain? Or should they take them off slower with much less pain, but over a long period of time? And he lies in hospital and he thinks, if I ever get out of this place, I'm going to devote my life to working out that one question. And he studies psychology. And he comes back to the hospital and says to the nurses, you got it wrong. The right answer is you should have taken it off really fast with excruciating pain, but you should have gotten it over with as soon as possible. And the nurses say, no, you got it wrong. You're only thinking of your own pain. You're not thinking of the pain that we went through every time we had to take off your bandages. And suddenly Dan Ariely realizes that he never understood human nature. He needs to go back and he becomes an economist and a behavioral economist, and he starts actually trying to work out human nature and does a lot of research into the issue of honesty. And for example, they go to people and they say to people, do a maths test, and they know on average people get 4 out of 10 correct on the maths test. And he does this at MIT, where he later became a professor. Now he's moved on, he's at Duke. And then he says to everyone, do the maths test, mark it yourself, rip up your exam paper, come tell us how well you did. And he discovers that the average mark goes up from 4 to 6. And then he does another thing, says, well, do the maths test, rip it up, come tell us how well you did, and for every right answer we give you, we're going to give you some money. And in fact, people don't really cheat for money, because cheating for money is stealing, and stealing is wrong. But interestingly, they say again, do the maths test, mark it yourself, rip it up, come tell us how well you did, and we're going to give you a plastic token. And you can take that plastic token and go to the next desk and swap every plastic token for money. And suddenly the average mark on the maths test goes up to 8. because you're not stealing money. You're taking something else, and therefore it's not so wrong. So we know a lot of work has been done psychologically around this issue of honesty. And when you see people cheating around you, it gives you permission yourself to cheat. It's universally acceptable. And that's what really happened. And that's why the looting that took place only in areas where people saw the chaos. People in Mpumalanga and Limpopo and the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, places like the Eastern Cape, much more impoverished than anywhere else. Limpopo, enormously poor. Nothing was looted. Nothing happened because permission wasn't given by watching other people commit crime. So the one lesson we learn is that if we had shot dead the first 10 looters, probably the rest of this would never have happened. But our constitutional court, and we pride ourselves in having one of the most advanced constitutions in the democratic world, our constitutional court has ruled that you cannot use lethal force to protect property. You can only use lethal force to protect your own life. And so the police, who were completely taken by shock and surprise by all of this, who didn't have riot gear, suddenly are called and they see people looting shops, and the instruction is you can't use lethal force against any of these people. So they stand back unarmed watching all of this. I mean, there are videos of police literally swearing at the looters, of throwing things at the looters, but they can't take out their guns. And so people just ignore them. And more people come. And within the KwaZulu-Natal areas, in places like KwaMashu, it just becomes a feeding frenzy. And we see these lines of cars, luxury vehicles, Mercedes-Benzes opening up their boots, their trunks, and literally emptying out luxury shops and pharmacies. 30 pharmacies in KwaZulu-Natal were completely ransacked. People went in, took the cough mixture. In fact, they laughed that the only shops that were untouched in many of the malls that were looted, and close to 200 malls were looted, the only shops that were untouched were Exclusive Books, the booksellers. And maybe that's a terrible reflection of where we are as a society, that if you have a product that no one wants to loot, it's very, very worrisome. But the Exclusive Books were untouched. But Debonair's Pizzas had their oven stolen. And it only took place in areas where the police did nothing and where other people were looting. So within the Johannesburg area, and I see there are a lot of people from Johannesburg on this call, within Johannesburg, they went to the Pan-African Mall in Alex and they looted the Pan-African Mall in Alex. In Soweto, they went to the Jabulani Mall and they looted the Jabulani Mall. And then suddenly something clicked within the people. You started seeing mass crowds of people coming out to protect their malls. In places like KwaZulu-Natal, particularly the Jewish, the Indian, the English speakers came out with guns, with golf clubs, and many of you will remember the name Barry Proctor. People tell the story of how Barry Proctor came out with his cricket bat to go protect his neighborhood. And black people and white people and Indian people stood next to each other to protect their neighborhoods. In places like Soweto, the black community, the local community came out and formed barriers around places like the Maponya Mall and many of the other malls. The people would no longer tolerate this level of looting. But it happened maybe a little too late, because on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of last week, there were the mass riots. By Wednesday evening, people came out with their cricket bats, with sticks. They protected their communities. They protected their malls. They did what it took in order to make sure that this was happening. Our police force, our military, and our intelligence, and certainly our government appear to have been taken completely by surprise. On Monday evening of last week, our president addressed the nation in what was one of the poorest addresses I've ever seen. He seemed dazed. He seemed shell-shocked. He didn't seem to know what was going on. Clearly, his intelligence community had no knowledge of what he was talking about. He addressed the nation again on Friday evening, And there you saw he came out flanked by his policemen and his military general. He's deployed 25,000 troops onto the streets. We think he should be deploying much more than that. We were very effective during the era of COVID when we were on lockdown level 5. We were very effective arresting surfers and people on the beach. We seem much less effective in arresting looters on the streets. But I must say, since Thursday, nothing's really happened. Everything seems to have quietened down. The cleanup has begun. You know, there are wonderful scenes, and I'll show you a little later, one of those heart-rendering videos of people sweeping and cleaning, and people are coming together, and there's a great sense and a spirit of building an Ubuntu, and we feel part of rebuilding a nation. Of course, that doesn't mean to say that we've addressed any of the real issues. The real issues are still out there. The political issue, Ramaphosa needs to go destroy the Gupta faction that has so looted our entire country politically on a mass scale within government, and now on the streets. They have to go and crush them. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. But it hasn't addressed the issue of the fact unemployment and poverty is a massive issue in South Africa. Nothing has changed. COVID has only exacerbated the problem. More and more people are unemployed all the time. After 16 months of lockdown, the economy, which was critical before, is now probably on life support. The one thing we are very sensitive about is those of our fellow South Africans who've left, some of whom are a little gloating about what has happened. And those of us who are here are very sensitive to that issue, that this isn't the time for people to tell us, we told you so. And there have been those. But, you know, those of us who are here, most of us who are here because we want to be here, because we think this is a remarkable country, and we think we can wake up every day and we can change the future and the direction of our nation. And that's what we do every single day. And we suffer setbacks. Last week was a devastating setback for our nation. But it doesn't mean to say that we will rise, or we won't rise again. And the thing that you realize living in the colonies is that you build a little bubble for yourself. And we as a Jewish community have been very good at doing that. The thing that we've realized is you can never be dependent on government for anything. And that's not new to now. Those of us who grew up in the apartheid era knew our parents didn't send us to public schools because they weren't good enough. Knew we had to do whatever it took. We had private medical aid because you couldn't be dependent on government and medical aid, and that's just followed on. And so as a community now, we know, for example, that we have our own welfare organizations like the Chevra Kadisha, who are the largest, the Johannesburg Chevra Kadisha are the largest NGO in the Southern Hemisphere. And we have our own ambulance service in Atsola. And we have our own security services for both CSO for anti-terrorism stuff and to protect our institutions, and organizations like CAP, which I helped start, which protects the physical security of neighborhoods in South Africa. And so you create your little bubble. And within South Africa, that may mean that you have a generator next to you, as I have a UPS generator next to me now, because the electricity goes off sometimes in batches for a few hours at a time. Or if you have your own Zozo tank for water, or your own ambulance service, or your own security, or your own medical aid, and you create your little bubble and you learn to live within that bubble.
Fascinating.
And so those are my introductory remarks, and I hope we now have a conversation rather than a monologue.
Well, thank you for lots of interesting insights. I think you certainly have a way of putting it all together in such a well-organized package that we can explain the situation. I know that I did see some comments on Facebook, people a little bit upset with some of the former South Africans, saying I told you so. But I think my reaction, and certainly the reaction that I had spoken to many who were from South Africa and in my community and others that I'm friends with on social media, I think the feeling was genuine care. I think a lot of people were genuinely concerned for certainly those who have family still in South Africa, but even those who don't have family there, it's still, as I said in the opening remarks, I think we still deeply care about the people and about the state of the country and the welfare and the future. So, I mean, summarizing what you said, I mean, you obviously still sound very positive about it. What was your sense, if you got a sense from, let's say, the religious leadership of the Jewish community, the rabbis, the shuls, the general feeling of, you know, people that you talked to in South Africa? Did you feel there was a rush, people calling the Aliyah office or scrambling around to see, you know, how they can get out of there, or or most people sort of in your camp thinking we're going to get through this?
So, you know, it's an interesting thing in South Africa because I think we suffer from a lack of leadership within communal leadership in the country. The greater sense, so one of the things that we did at the South African Jewish Report, and I'm non-executive director of the local Jewish newspaper, is we set up a series of webinars. We've now done 107 of them since lockdown began. And we do things from entertainment to education. We started with doctors about COVID and whether you take your parcels inside and whether you leave your clothes at the door. And we moved on to psychologists and then nutritionists and health gurus. And we've gone on to tackle many, many subjects. On June the 16th, we did history of the Soweto uprising. We told the story of the Mossad spy, Sylvia Raphael from South Africa. I mean, and our audiences have been unbelievable. Just so you get a sense, we have rebuilt this Jewish community as an online community. Yeah. It is a place where we have a town square where people come and chat. And for example, we did one on the great Jewish retailers 2 weeks ago. 14,000 people watch live. Out of a community in South Africa, there's only 52,000. You know, Jewish Achiever Awards this year, which we did online, we had between 40 and 50,000 people watching that live. And so we did a webinar on Thursday evening with what's happening in South Africa. And we had 12,000 people watching live. And because we use Zoom and Zoom has a polling facility, we poll people while they're watching and we ask them questions. It's very interactive. Like when we print out our chat at the end of a Zoom, it can sometimes go to 30 A4 pages of just chat. That's what our community, how we've transformed our community and turned it into a digital community. But when we polled people to say, what do you think? And are you looking to leave the country now? 17% of people watching said yes. Now that's done in the middle of a crisis. So by next week, the 17 will probably be 12%. And the following week, it will probably be 8% because we polled during the crisis. But that having been said, regardless, there are 160 people making Aliyah this month alone. And that's got nothing to do with the riots and looting that we've seen, because those people would have made that decision 6 months or a year ago. Yeah. In fact, last year, over 600 people in the middle of lockdown made Aliyah out of a community of 52,000. So it's definitely created uncertainty within our community without any doubt at all. It's created disquiet. Let us say that none of us were in any physical danger whatsoever. Like if that's a concern that any of you had, like this is something that happened somewhere else in the country. Like for many of you, this is like something maybe that that happened in Canberra or Brisbane. It's far away, but it's something, of course, that's deeply, deeply concerning to all of us. And you never know when it spills over. So our chief rabbi hasn't really spoken on the issue. Our rabbis haven't really spoken on the issues. And I think they don't really know what to say. Our South African Union of Jewish Students, the South African Zionist Federation, and the South African Jewish Board of Deputies went out last week on Friday, and they went to go help clean up the mess. And it's a fantastic photo opportunity. 20 people, a lot of them wearing kippot, go into Davyton, a black township not far from Alberton, and they go help sweep up the mess. The images are lovely, but practically it's nothing, because they never said to our community, everyone, let's go help. Right. It's the token, it's the photo op. And so people still just don't know what to make of this, to be quite honest. Right. We haven't seen any communal leadership, but we do know, for example, that the Aliyah department at the South African Zionist Federation, they tell me the phones are running off the hook. So people are looking at options. Yeah. But you know something, they've been looking at options since the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. And we've shrunk from a community that peaked at about 120,000 in the 1970s, early 80s, now to 52,000. And it's an older community, so our death rates are higher than our birth rates. Plus, on top of that, our immigration rates are probably about 1,000 people per year. So realistically, we're probably shrinking 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000 people per year out of a community of 52,000.
Right. Now, you mentioned about the, so that's interesting that it hasn't, your poll is a very interesting poll, that it was only 17%. That's quite interesting to note that it wasn't higher than that. But you mentioned it wasn't too close to home. I mean, I grew up in Sydenham, Highlands North, and our go-to place as teenagers was Balfour Park Shopping Centre. Now, I don't know if it was, people showed me videos that Balfour Park Shopping Centre got totally trashed. Is that
wasn't touched?
So that wasn't the right, that was a false video.
What wasn't touched? I mean, the amount of fake information that's gone around is just obscene. Balfour Park wasn't touched at all. There was nothing in Johannesburg. There was nothing anywhere close to any traditional white area that was touched at all. You know, Benmore, I started seeing people posting pictures and saying, I've run for my life in Benmore. Someone in Benmore Shopping Centre started shouting. Everyone presumed looters were coming. They evacuate the entire thing. It was nothing. There was no one there. So we have to be careful of false information, and there's a lot of false information out there. But yeah, Balfour Park wasn't touched at all. Sandton wasn't touched at all. Eastgate wasn't touched at all. None of the malls that you would know, unless you were from Durban, you would never have heard of any of the malls that were touched.
That's crazy, because people were really talking about Balfour Park. As I said, it was quite traumatic actually to see it up in flames, but it wasn't even Balfour Park. So there you go.
Wasn't Balfour Park, but doesn't stop people from spreading the information. You know, Balfour Park, for those people who don't know, is where Mayor Sharib meets Alexander Township.
Now, look, just moving off from the looting and the riots, because just for a moment, of course, you mentioned COVID, and you mentioned the great significance of your particular lockdown, so many months being at home. Being that I have family there and some friends, and of course community members from my particular congregation, and certainly from other congregations in Melbourne and across Australia, there's been a significant number of Jewish people who've passed away from COVID. How's that impacted the community's morale? How's that impacted, I mean, just in general, the feeling of community and so many, I mean, the Chevra Kadisha must be totally overwhelmed. I mean, I see that they're doing 5 to 8 funerals a day, at least over the last number of months. So how's that affected you guys?
So look, it's affected us very badly. In fact, I think I looked yesterday at West Park in Johannesburg. I think there were 9 funerals at West Park. And we've gone up probably on average from 1 a day, or just under 1 a day on average in pre-COVID times, to not unusual 6, 7, 8, 9 funerals a day. So it's certainly affected our community, and it's not just the elderly. I mean, it's primarily the elderly, but not exclusively the elderly. My friend who died on Saturday was 61. There was a 54-year-old who died yesterday. There are people 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine, age 37, passed away. It has had a devastating impact. And just so you understand the level that this virus has been at, for example, in Gauteng during the 3rd wave, you could not get a hospital bed, not for love, no money, no hospital bed. Friend of mine who needed oxygen, who had his own oxygen machine, but they needed to admit him into a ward, waited for 7 or 8 hours in casualty to be allocated a bed. There are no hospital beds available in the Gauteng region. Before the violence, we were in fact even shipping people down to KwaZulu-Natal who needed ventilators. You cannot get them. The hospitals are full, and it's not just the public hospitals, the private hospitals as well. In fact, Professor Mervyn Muir, who runs Charlotte Maxeke, for those people who've been out of South Africa a while, that's the Joburg Gen. And the ICU unit at Charlotte Maxeke is run by Professor Mervyn Muir, the most remarkable human being you've ever met. And Mervyn Muir tells me that there was a fire in the hospital a few months ago. He convinced them to open up his ICU wards, even though part of the hospital is no longer structurally sound. And he took in all the patients from private healthcare facilities because they just had no facilities in ICU for people. So there's certainly been a terrible sense of fear and danger relating to the virus, especially now, because if you need it, you're not sure you'll be able to get a hospital bed. That having been said, Hatsola in South Africa, does Hatsola operate in Melbourne?
It does, but obviously it hasn't been needed to sort of function at the level or at the crisis level that you unfortunately have had to go through. I mean, we have a very good Hatsola, but it's obviously a very good response from Ambulance Victoria and sort of our government facilities. But yes, Hatsola does operate here, but as I said, hasn't needed to function at that level. Thank God.
So Hatsola Johannesburg, and let me give you some figures because it operates primarily in Johannesburg. So if you catch COVID, the first people you'll actually call is Hatsola. Not because you need an ambulance service, but because they have a care facility. And what does this mean? They will send a nurse over to you. They will take bloods from you in your home. If you need oxygen, they'll deliver oxygen to you in your home. They will do your shopping for you if necessary. They'll deliver your medication to you. Someone will call you twice a day and take down all your readings. They'll give you a pulse oximeter so you can check your oxygen flow. They will call and get your oxygen flow levels, your heart rate, anything else they want. And they will then have teams of doctors who will assess you twice a day and tell you if you need to go to hospital or not.
Unbelievable.
Just how, so you know, so the number of Jews in Johannesburg are approximately 32 to 35,000. And Hatsola have gone through in the care of Hatsola. Now, not every Jewish person would go to Hatsola, and this is only for Johannesburg, have closed for 5,137 cases that they've dealt with.
Yes.
Currently, of people who have COVID, who they're monitoring on a daily basis, 991. And the number of new cases this week that were entered into the Hatsola program were 360. Now that sounds terrible, but it's actually great news because the previous week, new infections that week was 628. And the previous week before that was over 700.
Can I just ask you, how do you get tested there? Is it government funded? Do you have to pay for it? Where do you get tested?
So if you're in private healthcare, you can go to one of literally within 3 kilometers from a circumference of me, there are probably 5 or 6 private facilities, or you can go into a government hospital to go. But we don't really randomly go test. You only go test if you've got symptoms. Our test positivity rate at the moment, as of last week in Gauteng, of people who go to test in Gauteng, 39% come back positive.
Jeez.
That's a huge, ridiculous number. If you go up to the Limpopo province, for people who will remember, that's northern Transvaal, next to the game reserve, just south of Zimbabwe. In Limpopo province last week, test positivity rates were over 50%.
But do you have to,
so
if you don't have private insurance, do you have to pay for that? Or it's
you don't, if you go to a government facility, you don't have to pay for testing. Okay. No. But where our government failed us is they were very late coming to the vaccine market. So while other countries, and we compare ourselves to Israel, United States, and Europe, and I think many of those countries have messed up completely, but when we compare, middle of last year, they were all negotiating with Moderna and Pfizer and everyone else, and we weren't. We woke up to that only November of last year, and it was something that was concerning me greatly, and I contacted Adrian Gore and I contacted the minister, and suddenly they realized they had missed the boat because they had put all their eggs into the basket called COVAX, which was where the developing world were all going to share resources. And COVAX was failing. And when our first batch arrived in South Africa, and we have our own, what we call the beta South African variant of COVID, when our first batch of vaccines arrived, which was the AstraZeneca vaccine, they tested it against the South African variant and it didn't work. It had less than 10% of efficacy. what's the right word? Efficacy, only against the South African beta variant. So they returned the AstraZeneca vaccines. And they now had to scramble and had to try find new vaccines. So they got about 500,000 vaccines out of Johnson & Johnson, because one of the senior guys at Johnson & Johnson is a guy called Paul Copland, who was at school a few years before me. And I put him in touch with Adrian Gore, and they negotiated 500,000 vaccines for South Africa while they went to search for Pfizer. So we were late to the party.
Yeah.
But as of now, there is an excess of vaccines in the country. We've opened it up to everyone over the age of 35. As I mentioned, I just got my second dose of Pfizer today. We're doing first dose and second dose 42 days apart. And while the initial theory was 21 days apart, research out of the UK showed that particularly in older people, but generally, if you waited 42 days instead of 21 days, your number of antibodies was actually 3.5 times greater. So we as a country decided to go for that. So just so you understand, like, how our community is involved in all of this. The head of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID and on vaccines is Professor Barry Shube, a member of our community. Head of procurement for vaccines for South Africa is Adrian Gore, member of our community. The company, which is partly government owned, partly privately owned, that distributes the vaccines in South Africa is partly owned by the Kahanovitz family. So just so you understand, our community is absolutely involved in every aspect of the sort of stuff that we're doing. And then we have like many members of the NICD, the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, who are part of our community as well. So our community is heavily, heavily involved. We've opened up vaccinations to people over the age of 35. My sense is in the next few weeks, we'll open up to everyone over the age of 18. Yeah. Our big problem is going to be to get people vaccinated, not because there's vaccine hesitancy, as you'd see in the US. You get very few anti-vaxxers. You just get people who don't know or don't care or not sure, who are just not arriving.
Yeah.
So you can walk into a government facility today. The Joburg Gen has a vaccination facility. You can walk in today if you're over the age of 35, and you will be in and out in under 20 minutes. Because there's no one there, no one's arriving. And so we're going to have to actually literally go door to door to get people vaccinated. But we don't have the same problem as the US, particularly the southern states in the US. We don't have an anti-vaxxer movement in South Africa. I mean, Canada's messed up their vaccine program. France definitely messed up their vaccine program. So we're not unique in that, but we've caught up really, really fast. But our challenge is going to be to make sure that enough people actually have the jab.
That's interesting. I mean, we here in Melbourne, in Australia, there's lots of criticism, about our vaccine rollout. I think they're moving ahead now, but yeah, I think a lot of countries were a little bit slow to the start, and it's really how fast you can pick up from when you realize you've messed up. Yeah, I think there's also probably a lack of information that goes around. Certainly in the underdeveloped areas, people wouldn't have a clue about getting a vaccine or knowing how to do it or where to go. So it is a big challenge in South Africa.
So just as an example, there's a young doctor in his 20s called Menachem Hochman, and he's been running the vaccination center from Frumme. I see you nodding, Rolf. Nice little Frumme. His father's an anaesthetist in Joburg, also nice Frumme. And he's been running the Jabulani Mall vaccination center, which was one of the malls actually looted during the thing. But they said to him 2 weeks ago, they said, don't you want vaccines for your own community? We'll give you. And he called me up and said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't know. At that point in time, we were only open to over 50s. And he said, I don't know anyone over 50 in our community wants a vaccine who doesn't have, like. And he went to one of the shuls, the base shul in Glen Hazel, Rabbi Aaron Zulberg, and he set up a vaccination center, and they vaccinated 870 vaccines in a single day. Domestic workers whose employers had never encouraged them to go get vaccines. A friend of mine tells me she was walking to the vaccination center and she came across a domestic worker saying, I hear the vaccines, I don't know where to go, can you help me? And she said, sure, walk with me. Her employer was a rabbi who refused to give her a day off to go get a vaccine.
Right.
Now I ask you, what sort of imbecile would do something like that? Not only because it's the right thing to do, but he's protecting his own family to make sure that the domestic worker in their home is actually vaccinated. So we've got a lot of work to do even within our own communities, because we have people coming into our homes in South Africa every single day, domestic workers, gardeners, security guards. We need to make sure that everyone is vaccinated. It protects us, it's in our interest.
So it's not just a matter of having the supply, it's a matter of being able to use your smarts about it.
Exactly.
If I can ask you obviously not to mention that particular rabbi, but just in general, some people have sent me private messages, and we'll take a few questions now if people want to, if you're okay with that, Howard.
Absolutely.
No, just in terms of obviously being a rabbi and seeing the impact of COVID on religious life and shul life. I know that I think your shuls are still closed as we speak, but how do you see the future of shul life picking up after? I don't know if you're a shul goer yourself or if you're part of a particular congregation, but has there been a decline in the interest level? I know you said you're getting 12,000 people watching your Zoom things, which is phenomenal. Do you have any comment on that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. So I actually am a shul goer. I like to say I'm a very traditional, non-religious shul goer, and Greg used to sing at me on Friday evenings on a very regular basis. I think it's not so easy, and it's not such an easy question. And I'm going to tell you a side story, because I was chatting to my rabbi a few weeks ago, because one of the things that because I've been trying to be involved in making sure as many people get vaccinated in our community as possible.
Yes.
One of the people I've been dealing with is my rabbi and other rabbis to try and get the message out to all their congregants when things are open, encouraging people to go. And my rabbi, I said, like, has everyone at that point in time over 50 gone for their vaccinations yet? Can we start working on the over 35s? And he said, well, there's a surprisingly large number of people who just aren't interested in getting a vaccine. And I said, you know, when I do come to shul, there's a men's section and there's a women's section. I will not go back to shul until there's a section for unvaccinated people, because I don't want one of those unvaccinated people posing a threat to me when I come back to shul. And I think that's a very real reality that we're all going to have to face, that in order to encourage me to go back, you can't place me in any additional danger.
Yeah.
Now, my shuls are closed at the moment in South Africa. I haven't been to shul over this period. My shul davens when it is allowed to outside, in a tent outside with the flaps open.
Yeah.
People don't go into shul, but I think it's going to be not so easy to bring people back. It's going to be a process. I think we want the sense of community again, but people are frightened. And I think people are going to be frightened for a while. You know, you guys don't know what it's like to, but you know, we've worn masks now for 16 months. I can't see us in the foreseeable future taking off our masks. And the fact that even when shuls were operating, there was no singing. Like, that was half the fun of it.
Right.
You know, I'd say with Greg singing, that was 80% of the fun of it. You know, so it's going to look like a different experience. What we have seen, and it's been very interesting to see, and some of this you may not approve of, but we started, for example, Pesach last year in South Africa, which was our first crisis as a community, because we wouldn't be able to have seders and people wouldn't be able to go to Shul on Yom Tov. And so we had webinars about Pesach, and we tried to steer away from webinars on religious things because we want the shuls to own that.
Yeah.
But we did have kind of communal, we had the chief rabbi and Rebbitzins on and talking about Pesach and the meaning, and had some music and some chazonim singing. We had chazonis from Australia and America. And And we started getting people saying to us, I don't know how to get matzah. I don't know where to get Pesach food from. And so we posted on the thing, let us know if you can't get matzah or anything Pesach, we will arrange for you to get. Like, just out of the blue, said the board of the Jewish Report will make a plan. What amazed us, we were contacted from Sydney, Melbourne, London, New York, from people who said, I don't know how to get Pesach food. I've got COVID, I'm stuck at home. And we arranged deliveries from South Africa in Sydney and Melbourne and London and New York to people because their communities were not doing it. So it's part of the way we redefine. Now, the part that I said you may not agree with is for Pesach this past year, we were contacted by the progressive community. Now the Reform progressive community in South Africa is small. It's about 8% of our community, but they said, you know, you always exclude us. And I thought that was a very legitimate thing. Like, we're building community, and that means we're a broad tent of community. And we said, well, how can we help? And they said, well, just include us in things. So for Pesach this past year, we actually expanded the tent. We had a woman cousin from New York singing Manish Tana. We had, for example, and we linked because Freedom Day in South Africa was the same time as Pesach. So this year, our webinar about it was about human rights and freedom. And we had people like Rabbi David Saperstein, who comes from the progressive community, talking about freedom. I mean, we had Orthodox rabbis who work with refugees in the south of America, south of the United States of America, talking about refugees as well. And you know something? We had progressive rabbis and a woman chazan on, and no one died. And I think that's part of the lessons that we're learning. If we are a community, we don't have to agree with everything. We just all have to belong to the same, subscribe to the same sort of values and ideas. And I think that's something that we've learned throughout this. So, you know, sometimes on a Friday night, I will link into one of the shuls locally in South Africa and hear the rabbi speak and some singing or whatever. And sometimes I will do that by watching the same thing in America, or I could in Australia, or I could in Israel or the UK. Because what we've done in all of this is we've broken down this idea of location through using technology. I can be part of a community that includes you, even though you're sitting many thousands of miles away from me. I can feel part of a world jury because I can participate in a shul service in New York. It was very interesting that over Rosh Hashanah, the Hampton Shul, which is an Orthodox shul, said, turn on your Zoom before Shabbat, and actually negotiated with Zoom to allow extended Zoom periods, that if your computer is on and you turned it on before Yom Tov, you'll be able to hear our service. And I felt part of the Hamptons community. Chazan Herzstik, one of the greatest cousins in the world, davening there, I felt part of that community. And when we look at the webinars that we do, and about 40% of the people watching them are not in South Africa. And we have viewers in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Bangkok, and Panama City, and Nigeria, and Kenya, and Mozambique. What we've redone is we've redefined community. We can be part of a Jewish people. And I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I imagine you see yourself as an Australian community. You probably have really strong relationships with Israel. But do you feel yourself part of an Argentinian community or Brazilian Jewish community or Singapore? And I think now we can start speaking again of the Jewish people united around the world. Absolutely. And creating this world Jewish community.
That's beautiful. I mean, I think our experience when we had our longest period of lockdown, which was, I think it was 3 months on the, we had a very similar experience to what you've just described, where we were connecting to communities. Certainly I felt, through a lot of the talks I had arranged, we were connecting to people who were not living in Melbourne, who were from all parts of Australia and the world. But I have found, and look, you haven't yet reached that, and we're going back and forth. But when I found we had the opportunity to meet in person again, I think there's no comparison, and we all know that, to the human connection, where you really can be with others in person. And look, this is, as you said, this is open doors which we never would have imagined or dreamed of, like you said, connecting to the Hampton Shul. I don't think you ever would have thought about that prior to COVID. So yeah, you've got to look at the blessing in all of it. So if you can just answer this final question, where to from here, South Africa? Somebody wrote, you didn't answer the full question. I mean, is there in your mind, and of course I think you have answered it without having said it outright, but maybe you want to, just with closing remarks, is there a future for South African Jews in your view?
I don't know how to answer that question because I'm not sure it's a legitimate question.
Okay.
I've spent time in Jewish communities like Panama City, which has a thriving Jewish community of 12,000 people. Spent time in Costa Rica with a 5,000 strong Jewish community, enormously strong.
Yeah.
Numbers do not determine the strength of your community. I'm going to give it a guess that how many Jews are there in Melbourne?
I don't know, 50, 60, 70,000. I don't know, 60,000. I don't even know. I'm
70, 80,000. Basil, 80,000.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I'm going to have it a guess that the 32,000 in Joburg, Jews in Joburg have a far more vibrant, active Jewish life than the 80,000 Jews in Melbourne do. I can tell you that our communities are stronger, our institutions are stronger, our Jewish education is stronger, our connection to Israel is stronger. I guarantee you that 100%. We have built something remarkable in this country that I have never seen replicated in any of the 76 countries that I've been to. And in each of those, I've gone to seek out the Jewish community. And that's why, is there a future for South African Jews? My answer is absolutely. It may not be at the 52,000 level. Maybe it will be at 40,000. Maybe it will be at 30,000. But we don't necessarily measure ourselves in just that one dimension.
Yeah.
We measure ourselves in the quality of our Jewish life, in the strengths of our Jewish day schools, in the quality of our rabbis and our shuls and our Jewish thinking and our Jewish radio station. Do you have a Jewish radio station in Melbourne?
We do. I don't know how popular it is, but there is one, fortunately.
Yeah, so we got Jewish newspapers and Jewish radio stations, and you can live such a remarkable Jewish life within this environment. But you cannot be oblivious to, of course, the world outside. And that's the important thing.
Yeah.
And if you are in South Africa, you must be in South Africa because you don't expect a quiet, normal life. If I wanted that quiet, boring, dull, normal life, I would come to Australia. I've been a few times. You people have an amazing country.
I hope that's wine.
Oh, if only. I'll swap to the tequila later. No, I think you've got an amazing country. But I think you wake up in a society every day that's already been formed. I'll wake up in a society every morning that I'm going to build. And that's the part that excites me most of all.
It's a great attitude. I mean, we do love it here. So, but it's a wonderful attitude that you have. And yeah, look, I just want to thank you for just being so open, so just really giving us a beautiful insight into what's happening there and the reality on the ground. And it's amazing to see your courage, your ability to think positive, and just to call it as it is, as you see it. Tomorrow night, we're actually having another talk with, I'm sure you know him, Dr. Dean Gerson.
Of course.
He'll be joining us, same Zoom link, same time, 8 p.m. in Melbourne. He's going to tell us some of his fascinating stories of his travels around Africa and other parts of the world doing Brit Milah and all sorts of interesting.
I was going to say, I hope there aren't pictures of the brisses he's been doing.
No, it won't be X-rated, thank God, but it will be fascinating. So please join us tomorrow night. And
can I ask you to tell one story? Ask him about the zebra in Glen Hazel.
Deal. I've written it down now. Zebra in Glen Hazel, because I'll forget. But how do people keep in touch with you? Those of us who may never have heard about you, it's really interesting to listen to you. I know that you do a lot of articles, your Zoom talks. They can follow you on Facebook somewhere, or
yeah, look for me, Howard Sackstein, on Facebook, on Instagram, Howie_Sackstein. Join up the South African Jewish Report webinar channel. Subscribe to the Jewish Report newspaper, sajr.co.za, and continue to be part of our community. I think we're building something that has broken all international borders. So let's make sure we continue to build this.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate your participation. I know there are lots of comments. Great restraint Melburnians. I think when you told us it was a boring life, but
Can I play out with one last video, because I think my original video may have been a little depressing. So there is the sort of thing that riles South Africans up, the sort of thing that we do during World Cup games, the sort of things that when we think we're going to make a difference, that actually does. Can I play a short video to leave?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Cool.
Heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Well, your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to the kitchen chair, she broke your throne and she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Oh, baby, I've been here before. I've seen this room and I've walked this floor. I used to live alone before I knew you, and I've seen your flag on the marble arch. And love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Maybe there's a God above, but all I've ever learned from love was how to shoot somebody who outdrew you. And it's not a cry that you hear at night. It's not somebody who's seen the light. It's a code and it's a broken hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Wow. Goosebumps, mate.
Thanks. That's what we do because we're South Africans.
We want to once again thank you. And,
Wow.
and yeah, we should just be inspired.
Thanks. That's what we do because we're South.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone once again. Howard, what's it, just after 1 o'clock for you in the afternoon?
Yep.
You're not going too far too soon. So enjoy the rest of your day. And for those of you in Australia, have a wonderful evening. And yeah, let's inspire each other. Let's just think positively, whether you're here, there, or anywhere. And please God, we look out for each other. That's the most important thing.
Thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it.